So we're continuing our conversation with Dan Pitt, Executive Director for the Open Networking Foundation. Dan, would you mind maybe walking us through the history of ONF, their mission, and some of the key initiatives for 2015?
Sure. So ONF was publicly launched 4 years ago last week. We came out of this sort of accidental effort at Stanford University, supported by major operators, network operators, to kind of be able to somehow program the network the way they program, computers. They opened up the network equipment, created a new interface inside that hadn't been named or opened up before, separates control, puts it in one box, a simple server, and the forwarding in another, which is optimized for packet or optical switching. And they talk with a language that was called OpenFlow. This was a PhD thesis at Stanford. But a lot of industrial representatives of the Clean Slate Internet Design Research Program got very excited, and they said, gee, we should standardize this, and we got to make software-defined networking something that becomes successful in the industry. So they created the Open Networking Foundation, and they gave us this OpenFlow protocol, and we took it as our mission to help these operators leverage software-defined networking in a commercial way. So we've standardized the OpenFlow protocol, continue to update it, but we've taken a much larger mission to really champion SDN and open SDN for commercial success. So we don't view ourselves as a traditional SDO by any means, standards development organization. We take on all the things we can do to help commercial success, bring operators and vendors together, for example, hammer out working solutions, instantiate it in code and in real software when we can, and make sure that the open interfaces and the open protocols are done at the right level of the architecture so that innovation can flourish above it in a creative way and below it in a creative way, whether it's in chips or control software or control applications or true business applications.
What criteria do you use to deem something as being either technology or software as being open?
Well, that's a really popular word these days. It's in our name, and it's in lots of other names, and it's in product names. And we think it has three essential characteristics to be truly open. First of all, it has to be published somewhere, which means, in a document, certainly could be in software, where anybody can come and see it and look at it without having to get anyone's permission. The second, it should be some sort of a standard, whether it's a de facto standard or a committee standard, doesn't really matter. And third, and really most important, it should not be controlled by a single party or a very small cabal of parties. It should be community-defined, derived, and improved. And that's the real challenge for the industry, because they've had protocol standards, and you can see based on the sort of the lock-in experience of many operators that they don't have much of a say in it. And we want them to have more of a say, because it's their future that's at stake, and they know that. So we're big advocates of open SDN, where it can really meet the needs of a variety of different types of network operators through separate provision of hardware and software and the creation of software by them or other parties.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about your board of directors?
So our board of directors is all major network operators, and they really want to drive this bus. They formed us so that they could drive this thing. We have 8 major operators on the board, and plenty of other operators as members among our 140 members. But we have 4 main data center internet operators, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and Microsoft, 3 major telecom service providers, North America, Europe, and Asia in Verizon, Deutsche Telekom in Germany, and NTT Communications in Japan, and then a major enterprise, Goldman Sachs. Mm-hmm. The whole financial services industry views the network as a really critical part of their business. They're regulated, they're under compliance, they have huge performance constraints, and so it's really important, and they wanted to be at the ground floor of this movement as well. We have 2 independent directors coming from the world of academia representing themselves also.
What role do the equipment vendors have in the governance or programs that you initiate?
We have huge participation by the vendors as well as by the operators. The operators are in charge of appointing the highest leaders, but we have vendors, leading our projects, our working groups, our discussion groups. They're on our CTO Council, they're on our Software Leadership Council, they're on our Testing Leadership Council, and all the groups we have. Really, to make this a commercial success, we have to get the customers and the suppliers to agree on practical, workable, engineering-based solutions that can get out in the marketplace quickly and be proven and experimented with and deployed quickly. So we have to bring these parties together.
Okay. Maybe help me understand how you work with some of the other organizations that have the word open in them, whether it be OpenStack or Open Daylight, and then how do you work with other standards bodies like 3GPP or IEEE? It just seems there's a lot of entities that are putting their hand into this NFV, SDN, 5G bucket, and just help me understand how those parties, more specifically, you work with these other groups.
All right, so there's sort of two categories. There are the groups that are specific to SDN and the groups that are not. And the ones that are not, we want to help them and their customers, however they define them, take advantage of the benefits of SDN. So, the IEEE is not doing really SDN-like stuff. They do Ethernet standards and other things like that. That's the people we kind of interface with. Mm-hmm. And we don't change that stuff. By separating the hardware from the software, we allow those technologies to advance as rapidly as they can. Okay. For the ones that are closer to SDN, such as Open Daylight, Open Network Lab, and those, we work really hand in glove with them, where we share architecture with them. We will do software that fills gaps that's sort of outside their scope. We actually have a very close dialogue with these organizations. OpenStack, we also have a very good dialogue with. They're very much kind of a bottoms-up organization. You want to do something, bring in the code. So there's a lot of scattered code, but we are looking to make sure that whatever we do in the vein of open source software, and we do some of this, enhances OpenStack to be a cloud-based orchestration software scheme that takes full advantage of all the functionality you can get out of SDN, not just layer 2 VPNs. For the OPNFV effort, the Open Platform for NFV, first of all, these people are, they've been officers, they've been on our board. We work really closely with them to make sure we can help them succeed by the things that we produce for education, for architecture, or tools, or for software ourselves. We have I'm having regular dialogue with the leaders of all these organizations, and that includes the open source hardware groups, not just software. That's primarily the Open Compute Project, championed by Facebook with lots of other people involved.
And you mentioned in the criteria of defining open, you mentioned that ultimately you'd like things to be standards-based. At what point do you see the programs you're developing being adopted by the standards bodies?
Well, standards-based doesn't mean standards bodies defined. And as we move into software, networking folks are learning what software is all about. And standards there are usually de facto standards, because if you don't like it, you can change it, especially if it's open source software. And you can iterate very quickly. You don't have to do it in advance before you put in chips and hardware and then take a 3-year development process. So it's a totally different regimen for how you get things standardized. And de facto standards make a lot of sense there. Where software stuff does become standardized in an official way, it's usually after it's already been deployed and popularized, and nobody really cares about them. Who cares about POSIX anymore, really? We do have an official MOU, for example, with ETSI, the European Telecommunications Standards Institute, for their ISG on network functions virtualization. And so what we're doing with them is developing some proofs of concept, some architecture, and eventually some code on using OpenFlow and SDN technologies for service chaining, and for really being able to take as many network functions and virtualizing them in a logically centralized place, and then using SDN to effect what they decide down in the network switching itself.